It was -23 degrees outside, and I remember because I had checked my phone right before I heard the knock. It was just past 6 in the morning on a Sunday in January. I was still in my robe, hands wrapped around my first coffee, standing at the kitchen counter in my apartment in Barrie, Ontario. The heat was running. The windows were fogged at the edges. I had nowhere to be, and I was thinking about absolutely nothing. Then someone knocked on my door. Not a buzzer from downstairs. My actual door. Which meant someone had gotten into the building already. I set down my mug and walked over. I looked through the peephole, and I froze. My grandmother was standing in the hallway. She had her winter coat on, the beige one with the fake fur collar that she'd had since before I started high school, and she was holding a small rolling suitcase with both hands. Her head was down. Her shoulders were hunched. She looked like she was trying to make herself smaller than she already was. I yanked the door open. "Grandma." She looked up, and the expression on her face is something I will never be able to fully describe. It was relief and shame and exhaustion, all at the same time. Her eyes were red. Her hands, still gripping the suitcase handle, were shaking. "I am so sorry," she said. "I didn't know where else to go. I didn't say anything." I just reached out and took the suitcase from her, and I pulled her inside. Her coat was ice cold. She had been outside. Not in my hallway outside. In -23-degree weather. I found out later that my uncle had dropped her at the curb in front of my building. Not the door, the curb, and driven away. She had stood there for several minutes, trying to figure out how to work the intercom before a neighbor came out and held the door for her. She was 81 years old. I got her sitting on the couch and turned the kettle on. My hands were steady, but the rest of me was not. I was asking her quiet questions. "Are you okay? How long were you outside? Are you warm enough?" And she kept apologizing. Every third sentence was an apology. "I'm sorry for the trouble. I'm sorry to bother you. I told them not to bring me here, but they said there was no other option." I gave her tea. I sat beside her. And then, slowly, she told me what had happened. Her name is Margaret, but everyone who loves her calls her Nan. She is 81, originally from Cape Breton, and she has lived in Ontario for most of her adult life. My grandfather passed away 11 years ago. Since then, she had been living independently in a 2-bedroom apartment in Newmarket, managing her own groceries, attending her church group on Thursdays, occasionally taking the bus to the library. She was sharp. She was capable. She had a routine, and she was proud of it. About 2 years ago, my uncle, her son, my mother's older brother, had started coming around more often. He and his wife had started helping Nan with errands, driving her to appointments, offering to manage her finances so she didn't have to worry about it. Nan had thought this was kind. She had thought her son was finally stepping up. She had signed some papers. She hadn't fully understood all of them. My uncle had told her it was just to make things easier, to give him authority to handle her banking so she didn't have to go in herself. That morning, when she showed up at my door, she didn't yet know the full picture. She just knew that 2 days earlier, my uncle and his wife had told her they were selling her apartment, the apartment she had lived in for 14 years, and that she would be moving into a smaller place that they had arranged for her. When she protested, when she said she wasn't ready, and she didn't want to move, my uncle told her the decision had already been made. He told her to pack what she needed. Then he had driven her to my building in Barrie and left her at the curb. He had not called me. He had not texted me. He had not asked if I was home, or if I had space, or if any of this was okay with me. He had simply deposited my grandmother on a sidewalk in the middle of January and driven back toward the 400. I sat with her for a long time that morning. I made more tea. I made toast. I listened. And somewhere around the second cup, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger exactly, though the anger was there. Something quieter. Something that knew this was not going to end the way my uncle expected it to. I need to tell you a little bit about myself, because it matters here. I'm 29. I work as a paralegal at a family law firm in Barrie. I have spent the last 4 years working on cases involving estates, powers of attorney, and adult guardianship. I know what financial elder abuse looks like. I know what the documents are, what the legislation says, and who to call. My uncle did not know that about me. He thought I was just the niece who lived a few hours north and mostly stayed out of family business. He was about to learn otherwise. The first thing I did was make sure Nan was comfortable. I set her up in my second bedroom, which I use as a home office, and I moved my desk things to the living room. I got her extra blankets. I told her she was staying as long as she needed to, and when she started apologizing again, I took her hand, and I said, "Nan, you are not a burden. You are my family. Please stop apologizing." She cried a little. So did I. But I waited until I was in the bathroom to do it. Then I got to work. The first call I made was to the non-emergency police line. I reported that an elderly woman had been dropped off outside my building in extreme cold without warning or consent, and that I had concerns about her welfare and the circumstances that had led to this. The officer I spoke with took a report and gave me a reference number. He also told me to contact the seniors' safety line and the office of the public guardian and trustee if I had concerns about financial exploitation. I told him I already planned to. I want to be clear about something. I did not know yet exactly what my uncle had done, but I knew enough. I knew Nan had signed documents she didn't fully understand. I knew her apartment was being sold without her meaningful consent. I knew she had been brought to my door, like a problem being dropped off for someone else to deal with. That was enough to make the calls. The second thing I did was call my mother. That was a harder conversation. My mother and my uncle had always had a complicated relationship. She was the younger sibling, he was the one who had stayed close to home, the one Nan had always leaned on more. My mother had moved to British Columbia 20 years ago and had a lot of guilt about the distance. I think that guilt had made her reluctant to question anything my uncle did, because at least he was there. When I told her what had happened, that Nan had been dropped at my curb in January, that I had her in my apartment, that I was concerned about the power of attorney, and the apartment, she was quiet for a long time. He said he was helping her, she finally said. I know, I said. I need you to trust me that something is wrong here. Another long pause. What do you need from me? I need you to not call him yet. I need a couple of days. She agreed. That mattered. Over the next 72 hours, I built the picture. With Nan's permission, I went through everything she had brought with her documents in a folder she kept in the front pocket of her suitcase, an old accordion file she had grabbed on her way out. There was a copy of the power of attorney my uncle had had her sign. There were bank statements. There were documents related to her apartment, and those documents made my stomach drop. Nan's apartment had been in her name. It was a rental, but she had certain tenant rights, and more importantly, she had a small investment account, money she had put aside from my grandfather's life insurance, that had been quietly consolidated and moved. The statements showed withdrawals and transfers that had nothing to do with Nan's expenses. The money was going somewhere else. Over the 2 years since my uncle had assumed her financial affairs, roughly $60,000 had moved through her account in ways that did not reflect her cost of living. $60,000. I laid the documents out on my kitchen table, and I sat there for a long time. Then I called a colleague from work, a senior paralegal, who has more experience with elder law than I do, and I told her what I was looking at. She told me to contact the office of the public guardian and trustee first thing in the morning, to document everything, and to get Nan assessed by her family doctor to establish her current cognitive capacity, because that would be relevant to any challenge to the power of attorney. I followed every single step. Nan's family doctor was a GP in Newmarket she had been seeing for 12 years. I drove her there myself, explained the situation to the receptionist, and they got us in within 2 days. Nan's cognitive assessment came back clear. She understood what was happening. She understood what she had signed. She understood, now, that she had not fully understood it when she signed it. She cried in the car on the way home. Not because she was confused, because she wasn't. Because she understood perfectly. I trusted him, she said. He's my son. I didn't say anything. I just put my hand over hers on the armrest. My uncle called me on the 4th day. I had been expecting it. I had my phone set to record calls legal in Ontario, with one-party consent, which means I don't need the other person's permission, as long as I'm part of the conversation. I answered on the second ring. He was not apologetic. He was annoyed. He wanted to know why I hadn't called him to let him know Nan had arrived safely. He talked about her as though she were a package. He said things were complicated, that Nan needed more support than he and his wife could provide, that they had been carrying this for 2 years and it wasn't sustainable. I let him talk. Then I said, I need to ask you about the investment account. Silence. The one from Grandpa's life insurance. The one that had about 75,000 in it 2 years ago. More silence. I've been going through her statements, I said. I'd like to understand the transactions. He told me I was overstepping. He told me this was a family matter, and I didn't understand the full picture. He told me Nan had agreed to everything and that he had documentation. I know, I said. I'd like to see it. He hung up. I saved the recording. The complaint to the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee triggered an investigation. That process is not fast. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect these things to move quickly and they don't always. It took weeks for the initial review, and during that time, my uncle hired a lawyer and sent me a letter through that lawyer, suggesting that I was interfering in a private family financial arrangement, and that Nan had consented to everything. What they did not know was that Nan had already given a statement. She had sat at my kitchen table with a legal aid representative, and she had told them, clearly and calmly, that she had not understood what she was signing, that she had believed she was giving her son administrative authority to help her with banking, not the ability to transfer and consolidate her assets, and that she had not consented to the sale of her apartment or to being relocated without her input. She was 81 years old and she said every word of it without flinching. During all of this, she was living in my second bedroom. I had moved my office stuff into the living room permanently by then. We had a routine. She woke up early, I made coffee, she read, and I worked at the table. On Saturdays, I drove her to the farmer's market in town because she liked to look at things even when she didn't buy much. She was funny, genuinely funny, dry, and quick, the kind of humor that sneaks up on you. I had always known that about her, but I had forgotten how much I loved it. My mother flew in from BC in February. She stayed for a week and a half. There were hard conversations with Nan, between the two of us, and eventually, on speakerphone, with my uncle. That last one did not go well. My uncle said things that I think he cannot take back, and my mother said things she had probably needed to say for 20 years. I stayed mostly quiet because I had already said what I needed to say through the proper channels. The OPGT investigation confirmed financial mismanagement. The power of attorney was found to have been executed under circumstances that raised serious concerns about informed consent. My uncle was required to produce a full accounting of all transactions made under the POA. The accounting showed that a significant portion of Nan's funds had been used for expenses that could not be attributed to her care home renovations at my uncle's property, a vehicle, other personal costs. He was required to repay it. There were also charges laid under the criminal code for fraud and financial exploitation of a vulnerable person. I am not going to say more about those proceedings, because they are ongoing, but I will say that the recording I made of that phone call was submitted to investigators, and they found it useful. Nan's apartment had already been listed. That process was stopped. Because she was a long-term tenant, and the listing had happened without proper process, she had rights that protected her, and those rights were enforced. She was able to go back to her apartment if she chose. She chose not to. She sat me down one evening in late March. We were watching a documentary about birds, which she loves, and she turned to me during a commercial and said, "I don't want to go back there. Not because of what happened, because I don't want to be alone anymore." I didn't realize how alone I had been, until I wasn't. I told her she could stay. She said, "You don't have to do that." I said, "Nan, I have a second bedroom and I work from home 3 days a week. What exactly am I giving up?" She laughed. It was the best sound I had heard in months. We looked at a few options together over the following weeks. Whether she wanted to stay in my apartment, whether she wanted to look at a seniors building nearby, where she could have her own space but with supports available. She took her time. She asked good questions. She made her own decision. She decided to move into a seniors' independent living building, about 10 minutes from my apartment. Her own unit, her own kitchen, her own door. But people around, activities if she wants them. And me, 10 minutes away, who comes for dinner on Wednesdays and drives her to the farmer's market on Saturdays. She has a social worker now, and a financial trustee, appointed by the court not family, a professional who manages her accounts and reports regularly. Her CPP and OAS come directly to her account. Nobody touches them but her, with the trustee's oversight. She knows exactly what she has, and exactly where it goes. The first time she showed me her monthly statement printed out, in a folder she had organized herself, she held it up like she was showing me a report card. $92 on groceries, she said. $30 on the market. $14 on the library cafe, because I treated Doris to a muffin, and I'm not sorry. I told her she should never be sorry for that. I think about my uncle sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. I think about how he saw an elderly woman, his own mother, and saw a problem to manage, and an asset to access. I think about how he assumed that because she was old and because he had a document, he had control. I think about how he left her on a curb in January and drove away, and how he called me 4 days later annoyed that I hadn't given him a status update. I don't have a lot of feelings about him anymore. The feelings I had were very large for a while, and then they got quieter, and now they are mostly just small and sad. What I do have feelings about is the morning I opened my door and she was standing there. I have thought about that moment so many times. How cold her coat was when I touched it. How she apologized before she even came inside. How she had packed one small suitcase, and in it, besides her clothes, were 3 photographs, her church bulletin from the previous Sunday, and a small ceramic cardinal that had sat on my grandfather's desk his entire working life. She had grabbed the things that mattered. Even in that moment, even being brought to a curb by her own son, she had known what to keep. I keep the cardinal on my bookshelf now. She told me to hold on to it while she was getting settled. I think she's forgotten to ask for it back, or maybe she hasn't forgotten. Either way, it sits there on my shelf, and I see it every morning. If you are watching this, and you have an elderly parent or grandparent, and someone in your family has stepped in to help with their finances, please look at the paperwork, ask the questions. Make sure they understood what they signed. Make sure the money is going where it's supposed to go. Elder financial abuse is one of the most underreported crimes in Canada, and it is almost always committed by someone the person trusts. And if you are someone who is being helped in ways that don't feel right, you have rights. You have the right to revoke a power of attorney if you have capacity. You have the right to legal aid. You have the right to call the Senior Safety Line, which is 1-866-299-1011, and speak to someone who will take you seriously. Nan knew she could come to my door. Not everyone has a door to go to. I hope they find one.